Imagine standing at the crossroads of history and asking a simple yet powerful question. Who has shaped modern India the most? If we were to turn to mainstream narratives, the names we often hear are Mahatma Gandhi, Jawaharlal Nehru, and even Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel. And indeed, they played a crucial role. Mahatma Gandhi led a moral revolution against the colonial rule. Nehru laid the foundation for a democratic modern India. And Patel, he unified a divided land. But now, let us shift our perspective. Let us ask the millions who were once told they had no voice, the people who were denied dignity and opportunity for generations. Ask them, who gave them the strength to dream? Who carried a path for them in a world that tried to keep them in the shadows? Their answer will be the one name, Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar. He was not just a leader, he was a force of transformation. If Gandhi spoke of India's soul, Ambedkar fought for its spine. If Nehru envisioned a modern nation, Baba Sahib ensured that this nation belonged to all, not just for a privileged few people. While others fought for independence from British rule, Baba Sahib waged a war against something far bolder and more deep-rooted, that is social injustice. He was the architect of the Constitution, yes, but he was also the architect of hope for millions who had been told they did not matter. He was the voice of reason in a society that thrived on discrimination. He was a barrier, not with swords, but with knowledge, but with law and unshakable conviction. Despite his unparalleled contribution, why is he often missing from the mainstream list of India's greatest figures? Why do so many fail to recognize that the democracy we proudly uphold today, it rests on the foundation he built? As we reflect on his words and ideas today, let us not just listen, let us think, let us question, and most importantly, let us recognize that the India Ambedkar dreamed of, it is still a work in progress. The struggle he began is far from over, and the responsibility now, it rests on everyone. Baba Sahib Ambedkar is the people's leader and the nation's conscience. For years, history books in our schools and colleges, they glorified even minor freedom fighters. Yet the name of Dr. Baba Sahib Ambedkar, it was conveniently left out. He was not celebrated. He was not given the recognition he rightfully deserved. But did that stop his life? Baba Sahib did not need any endorsement or any media campaigns to carry his place in history. He rose on the sheer power of his ideas, his vision, and the unwavering love of the people he empowered. As education spread among Dalits and backward communities, the influence of leaders who were imposed upon them, like Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru, they began to fade. In their place, Baba Sahib emerged not just as a leader, but as a revolution in himself. If there is one figure whose presence is truly felt across India, not just in books or not just in speeches, but in the very soul of its people, it is Baba Sahib Ambedkar. Travel across the country, from bustling cities to the smallest villages, and you will find these statues everywhere. Not because the governments install them, but because the people, those who he liberated, people choose to honor him. He is his statues outnumber those of any other leader, serving as symbol of justice, empowerment, and resilience, despite Ambedkar's opposition to such statues. And this is not just about statues, it is about legacy. It is about legacy in the hearts of millions. Ambedkar is not a figure of the past. He is a living force, a guiding light of social transformation. While the influence of other leaders, it fades with time, Baba Sahib's impact, it only grows stronger even in 2020. His philosophy, rooted in equality, justice, and self-respect, it continues to inspire the new generation, shaping movements and redefining the aspirations of the marginalized. In this race, Jawaharlal Nehru does not even come close, and even Gandhi, he has left far behind. No leader in modern India commands the respect, admiration, and devotion that Baba Sahib does today. But this is not just about a leader's popularity. It is about Ambedkarism. It is about Ambedkarism, a movement that transcends time. His ideas of annihilating caste, ensuring constitutional morality, and fostering true democracy, they have taken deep root in society. Ambedkar's rise was never just his own. It was the rise of an entire people who had long been silenced. His ideas have sparked an intellectual revolution, empowering millions to challenge oppression and to reclaim their dignity. The growing embrace of Ambedkarism, it proves that his struggle was not in vain. His story is not just about one man's rise. It is about people's awakening, and that awakening is unstoppable. In the early years, Dr. Baba Sahib Ambedkar's influence was nowhere close to that of Mahatma Gandhi. The Indian elite and the ruling class, they left no stone unturned in crafting Gandhi's image as a global icon and an undisputed messiah of the oppressed. They built institutions in his name, commissioned thousands of books, and mobilized intellectuals to shape him into a near mythical figure. Despite all these efforts, something remarkable happened. Baba Sahib's legacy refused to be overshadowed the Gandhi's mythical figure. Yes, Gandhiji is recognized as an anti-imperialist and a leading force in India's freedom movement. But when it comes to modern values like liberty, equality, and fraternity, his philosophy stands dwarfed in comparison to Baba Sahib Ambedkar. In fact, to an objective observer today, Gandhi appears at times not just as a prodigal, but as an active defender of the very caste system that Ambedkar fought to demolish. Imagine the paradox. One of India's most celebrated national heroes of the 20th century believed in Varna and caste hierarchy, while Mahatma Gandhi evolved over time, embracing more liberal ideas post-1940. His ideology still left little room for science, rationality, and true social transformation. The struggle for a just, equal, and modern India, it was never truly Gandhi's battle. It was Baba Sahib Ambedkar. And unlike many others, he did not just dream of change. He built the intellectual, legal, and moral foundation for our country. Today, if there is one leader whose ideas continue to ignite minds, whose vision still pushes India forward, it is none other than Baba Sahib. Baba Sahib Ambedkar's legacy is not bound by shape or structure. It is a living force. It is a living force growing, evolving, and expanding with each passing day. His ideas are no longer confined to Atani Sedor, backward classes, progressive thinkers, and even sections of the so-called higher caste, they have embraced his ideology. They are not passive followers. They are the torch bearers of his vision. They question, they analyze, they refuse to accept blind faith and outdated traditions. Their thoughts are fueled by logic, science, and a relentless pursuit of justice. This generation does not look at Gandhi as a historical figure in the way mainstream narratives paint him. To them, Gandhi is a mythological symbol. He is revered but distant. And what do we do with the mythological figures? We worship them, but we do not debate them. We do not challenge them. Baba Sahib Ambedkar, on the other hand, he is very much alive in the national consciousness. He is discussed. Baba Sahib is discussed, argued over, and most importantly, he is a bigger source of learning. Today, millions, we can say probably even crores of Indian youth, they are awakening to his thoughts, drawing inspiration from his vision to build a modern, just, and egalitarian India. But this new nationalism, inspired by Baba Sahib Ambedkar, it is different from the nationalism of the past. It is not about poetic descriptions of rivers, mountains, and forests. It does not thrive on nostalgia or sentimentality. This is the nationalism of the working class, the farmers, the artisans, the laborers, and the oppressed. This is the nationalism of those who have built the nation with a respect and struggle. Those who try to distort the idea of nation, they may believe that corruption is India's biggest enemy. But they are wrong. They are wrong. The true cancer of our society is exploitation. One class exploiting another, one section holding an entire nation in its grip. And where is this section today? They are the same forces that Baba Sahib stood against. The same forces that fear his ideology because it threatens their dominance. Now, let's now see about Nehru and Patel. Baba Sahib, he holds a distinct edge over Jawaharlal Nehru and Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel in his unwavering commitment to the upliftment of marginalized communities, particularly Dalits and other oppressed groups. Unlike Nehru, whose focus was largely on political modernity, Nehru focused on political modernity and economic planning. And Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, he prioritized national integration. Baba Sahib's primary mission was social justice. He fought tirelessly to dismantle the deeply entrenched caste hierarchy and ensure constitutional safeguards for the most vulnerable people of our nation. As the chief architect of the Indian Constitution, Baba Sahib institutionalized affirmative action through reservations in education, employment, and legislature, providing historically oppressed communities with opportunities they have been denied for centuries. While Nehru and Patel, they contributed significantly to nation building. It was Ambedkar. But it was Ambedkar who ensured that the foundation of independent India, it was built on principles of equality and social justice rather than mere political unity. Moreover, Baba Sahib's approach was radically different from both Nehru and Patel in addressing the lived realities of marginalized people. Unlike Nehru, who leaned on upper caste socialist intellectuals, and Patel, who was closely associated with conservative Hindu nationalists, Ambedkar directly engaged with the oppressed masses. He did not just advocate for their rights. He did not just advocate for their rights from a position of privilege, but he lived their struggles. He fought systematic discrimination and he created platforms for their empowerment, such as scheduled caste federation and the Republican Party of India. Baba Saheb's relentless efforts. Baba Saheb's relentless efforts, they led to the Hindu Code Bill, which aimed at securing gender justice and reforming discriminating religious laws. It is an effort that Nehru himself failed to fully implement. By Nehru and Patel, they focused on statecraft. Baba Saheb focused on social transformation, ensuring that democracy in India was not just political but also social and economic. Baba Saheb, he did not seek to become a saint like Gandhi. He had no interest in passive resistance or symbolic gestures. He wanted to be India's revolution. Baba Saheb wanted to be India's revolution, but his work was far more challenging than any global revolutionary. He did not just fight political battles. He fought against the very structure of society itself. He understood that politics was only a superstructure. True change would not come from political reforms alone. Society had to transform. Only when social hierarchies crumble, when caste ceases to exist, when equality is not a distant dream but a lived reality, only then will the politicians, political systems, they truly reflect justice and democracy. That is why Baba Saheb Ambedkar, he waged a war against aggressive thinking. He tore apart the veil of superstitions, empty rituals, and religious dogma. He did not care where ideas came from, whether they were from Western, whether they were from Eastern, ancient or modern. He doesn't think of where ideas are coming from, but truth was truth. Justice was justice. Nationality had no nationality. This was in stark contrast to Gandhi, who at times sided with the conservatives in dismissing progressive ideas simply because they were Western. Baba Saheb is different. If it is a good, he is ready to adopt it from Western. This rejection of modernity was the foundation of Hindu Swaraj, and Ambedkar started it in his groundbreaking book, What Congress and Gandhi Have Done to the Untouchables. This was the first systematic demolition of Gandhism, exposing the contradictions and the limitation. But Baba Saheb did not stop at criticism. He built an alternative path forward. One of his most profound contributions was pitting Buddhist rationality against Vedic orthodoxy. At a time when the so-called Indian Renaissance was centered around religious revivalism, Ambedkar offered something radically different, a philosophy based on reason, compassion, and equality, free from the chains of caste and oppression. Baba Saheb's fight, it was not just for one generation. It was for every generation that seeks freedom, equality, and dignity. His legacy is not just about statues or memorials. It is about the millions who carry his thoughts forward, transforming India with every step they take. And as long as there is injustice to fight, oppression to resist, and a dream of a better India to build, Baba Saheb's voice will never be silenced. It will only grow louder. Baba Saheb Ambedkar's time in the government of India was brief. That is from 1946 to 51. But his impact was immense. As the chairman of the drafting committee of the Indian Communist Assembly from 1947 to 1950, he played a pivotal role in shaping the Indian Constitution, embedding principles of social justice, equality, and fundamental rights. Later, as India's first law minister, from 1947 to 1951. He championed progressive reforms. In just a few years, he left behind a legacy more profound than many who spent decades in power. His pivotal role in crafting the Constitution of India, it is well known, but his contributions go far beyond that. It was Baba Sahib Ambedkar who championed the Hindu Code Bill, a revolutionary step toward gender justice and social reform, which sought to uplift millions of women shorted by regressive traditions. But his influence, it was not confined to law and rights alone. Few know that he played a crucial role in shaping India's infrastructure and economic policy. His foresight, it gave birth to monumental projects like the Damodar Valley project, the Hirakud Dam, and numerous irrigation and power generation initiative projects that continue to fuel India to even today. As a member of the Viceroy's Executive Council from 1942 to 1948, he understood that true empowerment comes not just from political rights, but from economic strength. He championed the idea that water is wealth, and he ensured that India's rivers, they were harnessed to drive prosperity. Under his leadership, the Central Waterways, Irrigation and Navigation Commission, CWINC, it was established, laying the groundwork for a self-reliant India. The Damodar Valley project, inspired by the Tennessee Valley Authority in the US, it was not just about flood control, but about generating electricity and jobs for millions. The Hirakud Dam, one of the longest in the world, it became a lifeline for farmers and it is became a lifeline for industries, proving that Baba Sahib's vision extended far beyond social justice. It was about building a modern industrial India. He knew that without economic power, social justice would remain a distant dream. His vision was bold. His actions were transformative. His legacy continues to light the path toward a stronger, more self-sufficient India. While some leaders romanticized a Gandhian village-based economy, but Baba Sahib Ambedkar, he ensured that India did not remain trapped in the past. He was one of the architects who safeguarded the nation's future by ensuring that scientific progress and industrialization, they became the pillars of development. That is why when we look at today's India, an India that is democratic, that is modern, and that is increasingly driven by science, technology, and rational thought, we see more of Baba Sahib's vision than Gandhi. The deepening roots of democracy, the pursuit of social justice, and the rising voice of the marginalized, these are all legacies of Baba Sahib. And yet, there are those who seek to limit his legacy, branding him only as a Dalit leader, or even more narrowly as a leader of the Mahatma. How can they be so blind? How can they be so blind? A man who fought for equality for the rights of every oppressed individual, for an India free from discrimination. How can his vision be restricted to one caste or one community? Those who try to confine him in a narrow labels are not preserving his legacy. They are betraying his legacy. Baba Sahib Ambedkar, he himself warned against the dangers of hero worship in politics. He once said, the Indian tendency to accord the statues of Guru to demigods is more injurious to democracy than anything else. In politics, the tendency to worship is bound to lead to degradation and ultimately to dictatorship. These words ring are truer today than ever. Baba Sahib was not a leader to be pursued. He was a leader to be followed. His ideas, his principles, and his vision for a just and rational society, they are the true inner aims of every Indian. His work was not just for a community, it was for a whole nation. And as long as there is injustice to fight, discrimination to end, and equality to uphold, Baba Sahib's legacy, it will continue to inspire generation. He was not just a leader of the oppressed. He was a visionary who redefined the very foundations of India's democracy and development. So he is the leader of everyone, unlike Gandhi, Nehru, and Patel, whose contributions were significant yet limited in their outreach to the most marginalized. But Baba Sahib's vision, it ensured that development was not a privilege, but a right for all sections of society. His fight was not just for political freedom, but for social and economic liberation, making him the true architect of an inclusive India. Today, as the nation continues to grapple with inequality, his ideas remain more relevant than ever, guiding the path toward a just, empowered, and truly progressive society. So, if we see the foundations, winning foundations of this Ambedkarism, the foundation of Ambedkarism, it was not built in isolation. It was deeply rooted in the revolutionary thoughts of Buddha, Kabir, and Mahatma Jyotirao Phule, whom Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, Baba Sahib, he regarded as his spiritual and intellectual guide. From Gautama Buddha, he inherited the principles of rationality, compassion, and social equality, rejecting the caste-based oppression entrenched in our Indian archetype. Then second Guru, Kabir. From Kabir, he drew inspiration for fearless critique of religious hypocrisy and social injustice, advocating for a society free from discrimination. And from Jyotirao Phule, the pioneer of anti-caste movements and women's education, Jyotirao Phule, Mahatma Jyotirao Phule, Baba Sahib imbibed the ideas of education as a tool for the liberation and the need for organized struggle against caste oppression. These were learned from Mahatma Jyotirao Phule. These are three great thinkers laying the ideological groundwork for Baba Sahib Ambedkar's fight for equality, dignity, and justice, shaping his vision of an India where caste and social hierarchy would have no place. It was their teachings that fueled his determination to challenge the status quo, empower the oppressed, and carve a path toward a truly democratic and just society. A vision that continues to inspire millions. Baba Sahib Ambedkar found in Buddha something that separated him from all other spiritual leaders. The complete absence of ego, the rejection of supernatural claims, and the emphasis on rationality. Buddha did not claim divine powers. Buddha did not perform miracles. Buddha did not seek worship. He did not promise salvation. He provided a path. He was not a giver of salvation, but a guide who showed the way to enlightenment through reason, compassion, and self-awareness. This resonated deeply with Baba Sahib Ambedkar, whose entire life mission was rooted in logic, justice, and human dignity. He saw in Buddhism the antidote to the rigid, oppressive structures of caste and blind faith that had enslaved millions for centuries. When Ambedkar embraced Buddhism in 1956, it was not just a religious conversion. It was the culmination of a lifelong search for a system that upheld equality, liberty, and fraternity. It was a declaration that India's future, it lay not in dogma, but in rationality, not in oppression, but in human dignity. While Buddha gave Ambedkar the philosophical foundation for his revolution, it was Kabir. It was Kabir who gave him the fire that defines the spirit of rebellion that coursed through his speeches and writings. Ambedkar's family, he belonged to the Kabir Panthi tradition, and though 500 years separated from these two, their values were the same. Kabir in the 15th century, he was a voice of reason in a world divided by caste, superstition, and blind ritualism. He saw that religious leaders were not just spiritual guides. They were the intellectual rulers who controlled society's thoughts and maintained the status quo of oppression. He attacked both Hindu and Islamic orthodoxy. He refused to bow before any scripture and ridiculed the hypocrisy of priests who preached one thing and practiced another. That was Baba Sahib saw the same battle raising in his own time, 5 centuries back. His attack on caste in annihilation of caste echoed the sharp logic of 15th century Kabir, cutting through centuries of oppression with the force of undeniable proof. Kabir used in every word of Ambedkar's speeches, in his unrelenting fight against caste, in his refusal to accept any tradition that failed the test of logic and justice. If Ambedkar had Kabir's voice, he had Phule's blueprint, Jyotirao Phule's blueprint for revolution. Mahatma Jyotirao Phule, he was not just an influence on Baba Sahib Ambedkar. He was a movement, a vision, a force that shaped the very ground on which Ambedkar walked. Phule was the first modern Indian to challenge Brahminical hegemony in a systematic way, using education as a weapon to dismantle caste oppression. Ambedkar's father, Ramji Sakpal, he was deeply inspired by Phule's movement, and through him, N. Bhimrao, he was introduced to the ideas that would later become the foundation of his own spirit. One of the most painful blows to the Dalit community in Ambedkar's early life was the British government's 1893 decision to ban untouchables from joining the military. Until then, military service had been one of the few professions where Dalits could earn dignity, respect, and honor. This exclusion, it devastated the community, pushing them further into margins of society. Baba Sahib saw this as a direct attack on the social mobility of untouchables. An attack that Mahatma Phule had predicted. A system that was designed to keep the oppressed in perpetual subjugation. As Ambedkar grew older, he did not merely admire Jyotirao Phule's ideas from a distance. He actually took them forward, working alongside members of Phule's Satyashodhak Samaj, forging deep relationship with the reformers like Dada Kirishkar, S.K. Bole, and Prabodhankar Thackeray. Phule's belief that education was the key to liberation. It became Baba Sahib's vision, leading him to establish schools, fight for reservations, and ensure that the Constitution of India enshrined the principles of social justice. If Mahatma Phule was the architect of the social revolution, Baba Sahib was the warrior who took that vision from the margins to the very heart of the Indian state. Thus, Baba Sahib Ambedkar was not alone in his journey. He walked with the wisdom of Buddha, the defense of Kabir, and the revolutionary strategy of Phule. These three great masters, they shaped his mind, they laid the foundation of his mission and his legacy. Ambedkar did not just honor them. He carried their battles forward. He refined their struggles and transformed their dreams into concrete reality. The millions who follow Ambedkar today, they are not just following one man. They are carrying forward the legacies of these three towering figures who refused to accept injustice, who refused to accept hope, who refused to accept boredom, who refused to remain silent. And in their fight, in their words, in their action, the voice of Buddha, the voice of Kabir, the voice of Mahatma Phule and Baba Sahib Ambedkar, he continues to live on stronger than ever. So, Baba Sahib was a man of unwavering intellect and fierce. He stood not only against the social oppression but also against any ideology that denied people their right to think, coaching, and choose for themselves. Unlike many of his contemporaries, he believed that the Dalits were more than capable of analyzing, comparing, and making rational decisions about their own future, including the religion they wished to follow. This belief put him at odds with Gandhi, who held a paternalistic view of the Dalit community. Gandhi saw them as innocent, unlettered souls who lacked the intellectual depth to engage in theological debates or understanding the nuances of religious philosophy. It was the view of Mahatma Gandhi. His conversation with Dr. John Watt, where he dismissed the Dalits' ability to differentiate between Jesus, Muhammad, and Nanak. It exposed Mahatma Gandhi's path. Gandhi's stance assured that religious conversion was an act of blind faith rather than an informed decision, reducing the Dalit struggle to a matter of misguided simplicity. Baba Sahib Ambedkar, he knew better. He knew that Dalits were not interested in theological arguments or abstract spirituality. They were fighting against a socio-economic system that had trained them to centuries of degradation. For them, religion was not just a path to salvation. It was a path to dignity. It was not about divine philosophy. It was about social justice. While Gandhi preached patience and reform within the fold, Ambedkar saw it has escaped as the only viable path to freedom. Ambedkar's decision to convert to Buddhism, it was not a rejection of faith, but a rejection of a faith that had rejected his people for centuries. Unlike Gandhi, who viewed Dalits as an inseparable part of the Hindu social fabric, Baba Sahib believed that true emancipation could only come from breaking away from a system that had institutionalized their oppression. He was careful not to lead his people into another form of subjugation. He did not want the Dalits to become a political pawns in the hands of new religious authorities. This is why he chose Buddhism. Baba Sahib chose Buddhism not just as a spiritual path, but as a socio-political revolution. Buddhism was the only religion that did not discriminate, that did not chain people to a hierarchy of birth, that did not demand blind submission to divine authority. But even here, Ambedkar was not passive. He reshaped Buddhism, stripping it of elements that no longer served his people, adapting it to fit the needs of those who had suffered the most. His conversion, Baba Sahib's conversion, it was not an act of abandonment. It was an act of reclamation. He was not seeking refuge. He was seeking power, agency, and self-respect for millions who had been divided for generations. The debate between Gandhi and Ambedkar on conversions, it is not just a historical argument. It is a lesson for the present and for the future. It exposes the fault lines between those who seek to protect an oppressive tradition under the guise of unity and those who demand justice at any cost. Even today, in era where state-sponsored campaign like Garbhopsi, they attempt to force Dalits back into the fold of their religion. Baba Sahib stands. It remains as relevant as ever. He understood that true liberation does not come from returning to the very system that enslaved people. It comes from forging a new path, built on equality, built on reason, and built on self-respect. Baba Sahib's choice of Buddhism, it was not just a religious conversion. It was the first mass movement in history where an entire community consciously analyzed, compared, and chose their religion based on justice rather than tradition. It was the ultimate assertion of agency, the ultimate rejection of subjugation, and it remains one of the most powerful declarations of self-respect in human history. To truly appreciate Dr. Baba Sahib Ambedkar's contribution as a historian, one must first step into the intellectual landscape of late colonial India. This was a period marked by a fierce contest of nationalisms, some directed against colonial rule and others locked in internal battles. They locked in internal battles over identity and oppression. In their pursuit of unity, many of these nationalist ideologies, they choose to downplay or even outright ignore the deep fractures within Indian society caused by caste. History writing followed a similar trajectory, molding itself to fit the political narrative rather than challenging the fundamental equality. Challenging the fundamental equalities that lay beneath our society. Indian historians of the 1940s, they shaped by the education system of the British professors, they operated largely within the frameworks dictated by Western historiography. While they debated the objectives of history, they seldom questioned its methods. The dominant approach, whether imperialist or nationalist, it was one that prioritized grand narratives of kings, grand narratives of wars and empires, leaving out the lived realities of the marginalized. Even the Marxist school, despite its progressive aims, they often viewed history through the prism of class struggle, overlooking caste as a force that shaped India's social and economic structures. In this intellectual climate, caste, pride, and gender, they were seen as mere sociological concerns rather than fundamental aspects of historical inquiry. Indian sociologists, in turn, they developed models such as Sanskritization, which largely failed to capture the contradictions and oppressions they embedded in everyday caste relations. Amidst this economic inertia, Baba Sahib's approach to history, it was nothing short of revolutionary. At a time when scholars like Sir Jyotirao Phule confined themselves to chronicling rulers and military conquests, Baba Sahib dared to ask deeper, more uncomfortable questions about the foundations of Indian society. He did not see history as a passive collection of facts, but as an active dynamic force, an interplay of art, science, and storytelling, where the historian's role was not just to document, to provoke, to challenge, and to awaken critical consciousness. Long before historiography, it became an established discipline in Indian universities. Ambedkar was already pushing its boundary. He understood that history was never just about the past. It was about shaping the present. It was about shaping the future. Baba Sahib Ambedkar's historical methodology was radical because it rejected the blind positivism that treated history as an objective collection of dates and events. He recognized that history was always an argument, a battle over interpretation, over who gets to be remembered and who is erased. His critical engagement with ancient texts, particularly those produced by higher caste and Buddhist tradition. It was not an exercise in passive scholarship, but an act of intellectual rebellion. He understood that history had long been written by those in power to serve their own age and give the oppressed over to reclaim their dignity. They had to first reclaim their past. He did not simply chronicle history. He rewrote it, giving voice to those who had been silenced for centuries. His work was a call to arms for historians to move beyond individuals and events, to look at the system, structures, and ideologies that shaped civilization. And in doing so, he laid the foundation for a new, more inclusive historiography, one that remains a beacon for scholars even today. Baba Sahib Ambedkar, his contributions to history, it goes far beyond the limited recognition he often receives as a Dalit leader or as a constitutional artist. He was a historian. Baba Sahib was a historian in the truest sense, not in the conventional mode of his time, but as a radical intellectual, one who viewed history as a powerful tool for liberation. For Baba Sahib, history was not a passive record of events, but an active force that shaped human destiny. Unlike many of his contemporaries who sought to justify the past or integrate into our nationalist narratives, Baba Sahib's historical methods, it was unapologetically critical. He believed that history should serve the oppressed, not the oppressors. His groundbreaking work, the untouchables, it is not just an analysis of caste, but a searching indictment of how history had been weaponized to maintain social hierarchy. It is an unrelenting quest to uncover the roots of caste and untouchability. Not through mythical justifications, but through rigorous analysis of text, social structures, and economic forces. What set Baba Sahib Ambedkar apart was his understanding that history is intrinsically tied to power, like Karl Marx, Antonio Gramsci, and Mark Holst. Baba Sahib Ambedkar saw history as a site of struggle where dominant classes manufactured narratives to sustain their rule. Unlike mainstream Indian historians of his time, they largely remained within the framework established by British imperialist scholars. But Baba Sahib Ambedkar challenged the very foundation of historiography itself. He rejected the idea that history was merely a series of events or biographies of kings or conquerors. Instead, Baba Sahib saw history as record of power relations, a system of exploitation that needed to be exposed. His method was strikingly modern, resembling the approaches of historians who came much later. work has often been sidelined. Baba Sahib's work has been sidelined or reduced to a narrow identity-based discourse. His analysis was not limited to surface level description of caste oppression. He delved deep into its origins, tracing how it evolved as a system of control. Unlike nationalist historians who sought to portray ancient India in a golden light, Baba Sahib refused to romanticize the past. He saw the so-called glorious civilization as a machine of systematic oppression, a structure built to maintain a Brahmanical dominance while dehumanizing millions. His work was not driven merely by resentment, but by an unrelenting pursuit of truth. Ambedkar's training in economics, history, and sociology, they gave him an interdisciplinary approach that made his historical analysis razor sharp. He was not content with simply documenting injustice. He sought to understand its mechanisms and dismantle those mechanisms. His legal mind enabled him to scrutinize religious texts with the precision of a cross-examining lawyer, exposing contradictions, hypocrisy, and manipulations which had been used to justify caste for centuries. Baba Sahib's writings did not indulge in unnecessary abstraction. They were direct. His writings were direct, they were accessible, and rooted in a deep sense of purpose. He rejected the notion that history should be written for entertaining or as an economic exercise. He believed that historical inquiry had a moral obligation to serve the cause of justice. He had no practice for nationalist myth-making and the glorification of the past, which he saw as a distraction from the urgent task of social transformation. Like Karl Marx's critique of capitalism, Baba Sahib's critique of Hinduism and caste, it was rooted in a fundamental question. Who benefits from this system? He was relentless in his pursuit of this question, refusing to be satisfied with superficial explanations of token myth. He did not merely want to critique history. Baba Sahib wanted to reshape the history. One of Baba Sahib's most powerful insights, it was that those in power control. Those in power, they control the narratives that define a society. He saw how history had been manipulated to justify caste, to make oppression seem natural, and to keep the marginalized from questioning their place in the social order. He believed that deconstructing these narratives, it was the first step towards liberation. He was not interested in merely replacing one myth with another myth. He sought to replace mythology with reason, superstition with critical thought. He called upon his followers to read, to think, to question everything they had been taught, and to refuse to accept the tradition simply because it was old. In an era where most historians were still trapped in the rigid methodologies inherited from colonial scholarship, Baba Sahib Ambedkar, he anticipated the radical shift in his historiography that would come. He understood that history is not neutral. It is shaped by those who write it, and it serves those who control it. This is why he did not limit himself to simply critiquing Hindu texts. He actively worked to create an alternative historical consciousness, one that would empower the oppressed and dismantle the ideological foundations of caste. Yet, this Despite his unparalleled contributions, Indian academia has often reduced him to a label called Dalit rather than recognizing as a historian of the struggle. If Indian historians had taken his work seriously decades ago, the writing of history in this country might have taken a radically different path, which did not merely serve nationalism or regional pride. It questioned the very foundation of inequality. Baba Sahib's historical method, it was not about nostalgia, it was about justice. It was not about celebrating the past, but it was about confronting it. It was not about reinforcing existing power or existing power structures, but it is about dismantling those structures. His legacy as a historian remains one of the most overlooked aspects of his intellectual genius. It is perhaps the most crucial to understanding his lifelong battle for dignity, equality, and truth. Baba Sahib was more than a leader. He was a force of transformation, a beacon of justice, who redefined the idea of democracy, not just as political freedom, but as social and economic liberation. Unlike Mahatma Gandhi, Jawaharlal Nehru, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, their contributions were significant, but yet often limited in their outreach to the most marginalized. But Baba Sahib's vision, he ensured that development was not a privilege, but it is a right for all sections of society. He was not content with mere political independence. He fought to dismantle the structures of inequality that had plagued India for centuries. The foundation of Ambedkarism was not built in isolation. It was deeply rooted in the revolutionary teachings of Buddha, Kabir, and Mahatma Jyotirao Phule, who inspired his relentless struggle against caste-based oppression and social injustice. Baba Sahib recognized how history had been manipulated, how it had been used to justify caste, to make oppression seem abstract, and to condition the marginalized into accepting their subjugation. But Baba Sahib refused. He refused to let history be written by the oppressor. Instead, he rewrote. He rewrote it with the ink of resistance, reclaiming the dignity of those long silence. Today, Ambedkarism is not just a philosophy, it is an unstoppable awakening, a movement that continues to inspire millions to challenge injustice, find their rightful place, and build a nation where equality is not an aspiration, but equality is a reality. Baba Sahib's legacy is not just alive, it is rising and it is reshaping the future of India.